Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the District House. My name is Hannah Jo. Tonight, we have the honor of welcoming Lindsay Kent. She is a multimedia storyteller, author, and filmmaker. And before we delve into her presentation today, I want to hear from you, Lindsay, what it means to be multimedia.
Oh, yeah. So I have been making documentaries for about 20 years. But during that time, actually, docs don't pay very well. Spoiler alert. So I've done a lot of work with brands. I've made a lot of branded content and commercials, also like interactive games with brands. And now I am a author. My first book, everyone. It came out. So excited. So excited. So now I'm going from making documentaries into more fiction, and I'm writing some awesome screenplays because I do have a twin who's an award-winning screenwriter. And so, yeah, I love telling stories in a lot of different forms, and they just kind of keep evolving as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Well, thank you for bringing your passion for storytelling here to the District House. And Lindsay's work explores the intersection of consciousness and culture, which is totally relevant to what we're interested here at District 216. So for the next bit, she's going to offer us some slides and a few clips of her work. And then her and I will delve into a deeper interview. And then at the end, as always, we'll have space for the audience Q&A. So as questions come up for you, save them for the end of the night. And with that, I'm going to hop to the audience so I can watch your slide deck.
Thank you, Hannah Jo. Awesome. I have it right here. The power. What's up? Yes. Some of my things. Was anyone here for the screening of Going Further last year? Did anyone see that? Sweet. Okay. So, I started making, telling stories in this space back in 2014 because Zane Kesey, who is Ken Kesey's son, was getting the Further bus back on the road 50 years later to see how far the culture had come since his dad did that infamous trip back in 1964. And I was such a, nerd about this stuff in college. Like, I was not a deadhead at the time. I had never tried LSD, but I read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I read a lot of like On the Road and other books by the Beats. And so I was just obsessed about this bus. And so he created a Kickstarter campaign where anyone in the world could donate to get the bus back on the road and become a new merry prankster and get on 1 week of a 10-week tour. And I thought, oh, I'm definitely doing that. I'm just going to grab my camera and show up and see what happens. And so we're going to watch a little clip of that tonight. But since then, I have been kind of doing a deep dive into psychedelic history. There's a lot of really weird, wild, surreal things that actually happened that I don't think we're talking about enough. Specifically, things like MK Ultra, which we will chat a lot about tonight. And it's actually the foundation of this thriller and the next three books that I'm writing, which is What If MK Ultra Never Ended? That's kind of where this book was inspired from. But the reason I wanted to talk about this tonight is because I think that storytelling is really, really crucial when we're talking about how it impacts public perception. And specifically when we're talking about drugs, psychotropic and psychedelic drugs, what we're being taught and told about them has constantly shifted over the past century. And now that we're in this zeitgeist moment, you could say, about the psychedelic renaissance, where we have a sitting president signing into, law or an executive order that we should be fast tracking some of these substances to treat the mental health crisis that we're in, we should be talking about the context, that the history of this story, why it matters, who benefited from it, who gets harmed by those stories, and then what happens when those stories change. So that's what we're talking about tonight, all about narrative power. So I'm not here to tell you what to think about drugs, but I'm here to look at how we were taught to think about them. So I want to share one little quote that I think is really crucial. It is a myth, not a mandate, a fable, not logic, and symbol rather than reason by which men are moved. And I think the big reason why I wanted to become a storyteller in the first place is because I knew how stories had impacted me in my life as a child. And we're going to talk in a minute about the stories around drugs and how those impacted all of our lives. But stories in general are meant to contact us on a deeper level than our minds. And when you're able to emotionally, activate somebody, then you can shift their perception of almost anything. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So, by show of hands, who remembers the very first time they heard about drugs and what that story was? Does anyone have like a memory? Oh, all the way in the back.
Yes. Oh, okay. Well, my father is a physician. And so as a kid, he would come home with these aids to teach doctors about drugs. And we had one disc. There's a disc, and you could turn it to the different drug class that we're looking at. So black beauties and all the different speeds and all these different drugs on the market. That's how I learned about all these different drugs from my father. Me too. And I remember the Just Say No, and it was just so ironic.
Yeah, who else has a story that they want to share? The very first time they heard about drugs. Anyone else that was like, go ahead.
Mine was in Gallia at the DARE Drug Abuse Resistance Education. They had the sheriff deputy come to your school teach us how bad drugs were. It's all the reasons why we should just say go.
It was very close to what happened with me as well. DARE was obviously a program that was very popular in the 90s. It's actually still going on, which I don't know how that's possible. But I would come home from those workshops, and my dad would say, "Yeah, I call drugs DARE all the time. Drugs are real expensive," and so he would joke about stuff like that. And so I was very confused about like, if were drugs bad? Were they good? Like, I don't know. But I think we all have that first memory, that first story. If it was a parent, if it was school, if it was a movie, a news story, if it was DARE, if it was drugs will ruin your life, only bad people take drugs, or we just don't talk about that. Like whatever it was, like we all kind of probably have some memory. But the first drug story we hear often becomes the lens through which we interpret every drug story that follows. And in America, one of the loudest stories we inherited was the war on drugs. And when you hear about the war on drugs, usually the first thing that you think about is like Nixon, right? Who actually was the one to declare a war. But it actually started a little bit earlier than that with this guy, Harry Anslinger. He was the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics from 1930 to 1962. And some of you folks might not know this, but he was the guy who changed cannabis to marijuana in terms of the vernacular being used. Marijuana with an H, that's not a misspelling. He wanted to make sure that we were all pronouncing it properly. But the goal of calling it that was to instill fear. Like, oh, these Mexican immigrants are coming in with this devil thing. It's not the cannabis that you've been growing. Shh. No, it's a completely different thing, right? It's marijuana. And his whole goal was to incite fear around this substance that most people already knew a lot about, because it turns out hemp and cannabis were crops that were grown in partnership with cotton and tobacco at the beginning of this, country's existence. But he wanted to make sure that people had that crowbar separation. This is another thing, and it's really bad. So he associated it with crime and panic and sexual danger and violence. And then in 1937, he helped pass the Marijuana Tax Act. So if you wanted to be able to grow cannabis, you had to have a stamp. If you didn't have a stamp, you'd go to jail. But if you wanted to get a stamp, you had to show that you had weed. And if you show that you had weed, then they'd put your name on a list, and then you'd open yourself up to prosecution. So it was a very sneaky way of them saying, we're not going to straight outlaw this, but we are going to make it really, really hard for you to grow it and to use it. And that worked really well. Now, some of you may remember this little ditty. We're just going to play the trailer here. One of my favorite little propaganda bits. Everyone, they already know it already. This is great.
These high school boys and girls are having a hop at the local soda song. Innocently they dance. innocent of a new and deadly menace lurking behind closed doors.
Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell. In this film, you will see the ease with which this vicious plant can be grown in your neighbor's yard, rolled into harmless-looking cigarettes, hidden in an innocent shoe or watch case. In this startling film, you will see dopesters lure children to destruction.
We're going over to Joe's place. Why don't you come along? We have a date to play a set of doubles. Oh, you can play anytime. Come on, we'll have some laughs. Can I go along with you? Sure. Hey, I'll see you at dinner, sis.
If you want a good smoke, try one of these.
You will meet Bill, who once took pride in his strong will as he takes the first step toward enslavement.
Of course, if you're afraid.
Smoking the soul-destroying reefer, they find a moment's pleasure, but at a terrible price. Debauchery, violence, murder, suicide. And the ultimate end of the marijuana addict. Hopeless insanity. See this important film now, before it is too late.
Yeah, an hour and a half of that. The movie is very, that's what happened. Has anyone seen the whole movie? Does anyone remember seeing Reefer Madness? So the important thing about this is that it didn't educate about what cannabis is. It taught you how to feel about it. And that is what a lot of propaganda has in common. So how it works is you take a real social anxiety and you attach it to a demonized substance, and then you create completely out of the ballpark, exaggerated consequences, and then you repeat it until it feels true. Oh, and the good guys are the authorities telling you not to do it. Trust us. We know what's right. The funny part is when World War II came around and they needed people to be growing hemp again for the war effort, they were like, yeah, I'm sorry, we told you not to do that, but now it is your civil duty as an American to start growing this again. So please do it. It really just depends on what the agenda is behind whatever message they're pushing. It has very little to do with public safety. That's usually just the outcome. So fear can move people quickly, but it really builds lasting trust. And of course, once people understood what this really was, then that was started the erosion of the trust in our government and the people that are telling us these things. Now, while the public was being told to fear altered states, the government was privately trying to study and weaponize them. MK Ultra. So after the Second World War, the biggest enemy during the Cold War were the communists. And somehow they got word that the Russians were going to beat them at the control over the human mind. And if they could figure out how to control the human mind first, then all of their soldiers could be manipulated. They would give away secrets. It was basically game over. And so Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA at the time, was one of the guys who helped to start this program, which was called Bluebird, and then Artichoke, and then MK Ultra. And basically, it was the beginning of national security over any type of accountability or oversight. Basically, we realized once all the word came out about this around 1970, that they basically just gave a bunch of money to people who were wielding psychotropic substances like LSD, along with sleep deprivation and electroshock therapy and all kinds of crazy things. And they were just doling it out to people at universities and mental institutions and prisons. And they were even dosing their own agents without their knowledge, which resulted in at least one death, a suicide. His name was Frank Olson, and he went actually crazy and tried to leave the CIA and then allegedly jumped out of a window. One of my favorite weird stories about this is Project Midnight Climax. So there were 2 safe houses, one in San Francisco, one in New York, where they worked with prostitutes to bring unsuspecting Johns to these safe houses where they would dose them with LSD in their cocktails. And behind a 2-way mirror, CIA agents would just watch what happens, sip their own, martinis and call it national security because they thought maybe sexual coercion and drugs could be used to get people to tell their deepest secrets. So that was literally what was happening. There should be more stories about this. This is so batshit. How is this possible? So, yeah, government agents hidden in observation rooms, LSD and surveillance. It kind of collapsed the distance between Cold War paranoia and sexual politics and institutional abuse. So this was all in the late 1950s, early 60s, and they were really, really trying to see if something like LSD could be used to control the human mind. And some of the volunteer studies that they had going around the country were at universities. One of them was Stanford. One of the people who volunteered for one of those studies was named Ken Kesey. He was a Stanford undergrad studying creative writing at that time. And he volunteered for what he thought was just serving his country. He had never taken drugs before. He was really into beer, I heard, but that was it. And it kind of had the opposite effect. If anyone here has ever done a psychedelic, it's whoops, that's not exactly what it does, guys. That's not what we're doing here. And what happened after that kind of made history. So we're going to watch a little clip from my documentary called Going Further, which kind of tells the backstory of his experience with MK Ultra and what happened from that, and then we'll talk about it. And I did cue it up all the way to the beginning of the movie just for fun and to kind of show how far the culture has come since he took LSD in 1959.
Listen, let's not make this weird. You volunteered to be here. You knew what you were getting into. So, why don't we begin? Please look into the center of the screen. Look right at the center. Don't look away. We are calibrating your consciousness, optimizing for maximum psychedelic experience. Get ready for the trip. Now, are you on the bus or off the bus?
How did we get here?
How did we get here? Like many of the world's most significant tide shifts, this one begins with the particular vision of one man, Ken Kesey, the athlete, scholar, performer, and writer turned psychedelic revolutionary. Ken got a degree from the University of Oregon in theater arts, and then decided to enroll in the creative writing program at Stanford University. It was there in 1959 that Ken volunteered to take part in what later turned out to be a CIA experiment called Project MK Ultra. Inside Menlo Park Veterans Hospital, he ingested various hallucinogens like LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline. When he began working as a night aide in the psych ward of Menlo Park, Ken continued to sample these psychedelics while on the clock. He started to see the patients of the hospital not as insane, but rather as individuals pushed out of conventional society. This series of events would lead Ken to write his first novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Ken continued to explore the effects of LSD, sharing the drug with his close friends from Stanford. This caused quite the underground sensation. Acid wasn't just a party drug, it was an experience, a portal to new realms and new ideas, an opportunity to explore the infinite regions of human consciousness. In 1964, Ken was invited to New York to an event to celebrate the publication of his second novel, Sometimes a Great Notion. For Ken and his friends, the Merry Pranksters, the invitation was an excuse to visit the World's Fair, which had opened that spring in New York City. But this would be no ordinary road trip. For $1,500, Ken purchased a 1939 International Harvester school bus for the occasion. The group painted the body, transforming it into a psychedelic vessel they called Further, a one-word philosophy that would serve as both a destination and a state of mind. In June of 1964, they set off from La Honda, California, with beat icon and literary legend Neil Cassidy at the wheel, and an extensive amount of camera and sound equipment to document their journey. This trip, later immortalized in Tom Wolfe's The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, would play a major role in the dawn of a new era in American history.
We really didn't have much in the way of expectations other than, we'll just take this trip, or we'll have a lot of fun, and we'll go see the World's Fair. But we really had no idea. We hadn't thought about it in terms of, this is going to be some kind of epic thing that's going to cause all this reaction. We were just kind of off doing stuff.
At first, people didn't know what it was. It was just the first of its kind. It was a school bus painted all these odd colors with all these people up there going, woo, hi, whistle, whistle, tambourine, tambourine. There was nothing to compare it to.
When Ken and the Pranksters returned to La Honda after many weeks on the road, they attempted to turn over 30 hours of film and tape into a movie.
We were working on the film at Kesey's, still trying to make something out of it, before we'd realized what a ridiculous idea that was for a bunch of amateurs to make something out of this terrible footage that we had shot.
The tape recorder would speed up and slow down, and so the tape would go at all these weird speeds, but the camera, straight 24 frames a second, because it was on a battery belt, and solid. So we had a major editing problem. We'd get a piece that we could kind of put together, and so Kesey and I'd be editing during the week, and then on Saturday night we'd show it, and we were up at Kesey's house in La Honda. And the word started getting out that all these people were hearing about it, and they started pouring in there for these scenes, For them, it was just a big party.
Eventually, these parties outgrew the house in La Honda, so Ken moved the circus to bigger public venues. The Pranksters would premiere scenes from their film in progress, while the crowd took LSD and participated in the unique brand of absurdity. A local psychedelic band called the Warlocks, who would later change their name to the Grateful Dead, offered to play the events, and the acid tests were born.
The acid test was just discovering what there was out there if you just continued to move away from the norm.
The biggest and most renowned acid test was held at the 3-day Trips Festival at Longshoremen's Hall in San Francisco. It was the first multi-day rock festival of its kind.
The thing that Ken repeatedly stated that he wanted to do with these events was to break down the borderline between performer and audience. I think that may have been Kesey's biggest influence on our society was the acid test.
Acid tests continued to gain momentum from Portland to LA. In October of 1966, possession of LSD was made illegal. and Ken Kesey through his last acid test. The acid test graduation on October 31st in San Francisco, California.
We're all going to receive our diplomas. You have passed the acid test, because that was the motto of the acid test was, can you pass the acid test?
Neil Cassidy is going to be passing out the diplomas. I am just kind of helping put it together.
It was just sort of a farewell party. Kesey packed up and moved to Oregon after the graduation.
In the summer of 1969, Further and the Pranksters made it to Woodstock, riding the psychedelic wave to the end of an era. Shortly after, they retired the bus on Kesey's farm in Eugene, Oregon, where it would rust in peace. In 1990, Kesey purchased another bus, this one a 1947 International Harvester. Over the next decade, Ken spent a significant amount of time on the road with this second bus, reviving his infamous prankster persona for a new generation.
I say now, come into my heart, fill me with love. Let me work from love. If you work from love, just about everything you do is going to be all right.
Ken Kesey took his last and most significant trip in November of 2001. He died surrounded by his family in Eugene, Oregon. But his legacy, not only for his creative endeavors, but as a pioneer of radical self-expression and personal liberation, lives on. Ken and the Pranksters may not have set out to spark the psychedelic revolution, but Further and the acid tests caused a ripple effect, a chain reaction that has impacted and inspired the lives of generations across the globe. Which begs the question, how much further have we come?
Yeah, you can watch the rest of it. Thank you. How many people didn't know that about Ken Kesey? They didn't know. Really? Cool. Amazing. Goingfurther.com, $3. You can watch the whole thing. So the Merry Pranksters, the beginning of the counterculture, started to tell a different story, a different myth around psychedelics and what they could do. It was about participation and spectacle and liberation and creativity and community, and those are all wonderful things, but it also had its blind spots, as we know today. I mean, they would dose like trash cans full of Kool-Aid and then forget which one was dosed and which one wasn't. And there'd be like kids that would attend these acid tests, and it's very silly, reckless things. There was guru worship, lack of safety, romanticizing chaos. There was, it's not the full answer, right? So it changed the story around psychedelics. But even the stories of liberation can be distorted and can lack nuance and the complexities of this conversation. So by 1970, the conversation had become big enough that mainstream culture was beginning to wrestle with it publicly. And I just found out that this existed. In the February issue of Playboy, 1970, they released this interview between, I think it was like 8 people. Yeah. They invited all of these people who had different opposing views about psychedelics and psychotropics and what we should do as a nation about it to have a conversation. And it was Harry Anslinger, William Burroughs, the actor James Coburn, Ram Dass, Leslie Fielder, who was a lit critic, a law enforcement official named John Finlater, Joel Fort, who was a physician and drug policy reform advocate, Joseph O'Terry, an attorney, and then Alan Watts. And so you have people who are, staunch supporters of there being policy reform. There are, physicians who are saying the data doesn't speak to the type of, control that you're trying to wield over these substances. Then you have people like Alan Watts and Ram Dass who are like, hey, man, this is a, consciousness shift. This is a spiritual thing. We should all be having access to this. And a strong excerpt to highlight is the clash between Joseph O'Terry, the lawyer, and Anslinger, because O'Terry was saying that marijuana is basically harmless and should be legal, period, and that heroin addiction should be treated medically, rather than policed. And Anslinger responds with a fear-based prediction that legal marijuana would cause a massive spike in highway deaths, of all things. He was just constantly beating that drum of fear. And I found it so fascinating. Also, there's a podcast called Fraudsters. The whole season 5 is like based on the drug war, and they did this really awesome reading of this panel, and it's awesome. I highly recommend listening to it. It's bananas. So the modern debate about these substances that we're having today, you can kind of see it being foreshadowed in this conversation with all white men talking about what should be happening: legalization, medicalization, criminalization, harm reduction, moral panic, personal liberty, spiritual use. All of those perspectives were happening, 50 something years ago now. But the backlash was coming, and the war on drugs was about to become even more politically useful for one guy. Nixon. Yes, he was the first one to declare a war on drugs. He said drugs are public enemy number 1. What do you need when you declare war? You need enemies, right? And Nixon had 2 enemies, which we now know was the real reason behind the decisions that he made, because he was trying to keep boots on the ground in Vietnam, and he did not like the people who were dissenting about this. And there were 2 groups. There were the dissenters. It was those dirty hippies and the civil rights movement. So by criminalizing heroin and weed, that gave him carte blanche to be able to tap phone lines, to enter meetings, to raid houses, basically to do all the things to disempower those groups from being able to connect and to be outspoken about this war. And it worked. I mean, the guy did it. And so that was Nixon. Again, I think the important thing to be taken away from this is that there's always another agenda. There's always some other reason why this is happening. It's not that our government really, really cares and are just trying to keep us safe. Like, that is the thing that they're telling us because they want something else, some other type of control that this will help them get. So next we're going to talk about Reagan. So Nancy Reagan is the one who started the whole Just Say No campaign, right? She was the one who was very, very vocal. She was going into schools, teaching kids how to say no. That was happening. Her husband believed that too. I mean, they were both on that bandwagon. But the thing that he was kind of leaving out in terms of his background agenda was stop those damn commies. Gotta stop the commies, which is how the Iran-Contra scandal happened, right? Because he was basically taking American money and giving it to people in Nicaragua who were like, well, we'll just take this and also, maybe bring some cocaine into the United States while we're at it and make some extra money. And Reagan knew, because the CIA were in on it and they were telling him about it. He knew what was going on, but he's like, in the name of national security, we're just going to let this slide. And so inadvertently, that could have led to the crack epidemic that happened beginning in the 1980s because of this huge influx of cocaine that was coming from South America, controlled and funded in part by the CIA. Good times. Nixon, Reagan, now DARE. As we said, DARE, drugs are real expensive. So DARE was started by the LAPD and the LA school system, and it just so happened to coincide with the time that police were making headlines from really terrible brutality cases. It was right around the time that the LA riots happened, and these guys were, they were a lot of muscle and taking it out on civilians. And so they thought, well, we can put cops in classrooms and get kids to look at cops as the good guys, and that will, soften our image a bit, and will also get them to say no to drugs. So again, there's another agenda. Turns out DARE was a major failure, though. It turns out 5th graders aren't doing crack. Like, who knew? Like, what? It did, interestingly enough, turn kids into narcs, though, because they really bonded with these cops, and they're like, my dad has a bong in his closet. What should I do? And unfortunately, it did lead to some parental arrests because they were like, oh, tell me more. Let me come to your house and talk to your parents about drugs. So if the goal was to expand policing, punish certain communities, and create a cultural enemy, it was brutally effective. But if the goal was to reduce drug harm, it was a massive failure. But just moving into more about today. So a few case studies here. Reefer Madness, which we already talked about, the electric Kool-Aid acid test, which kind of portrayed psychedelics as adventure and liberation and cultural theater. You've got This Is Your Brain on Drugs. We all remember that lovely PSA, which was just like, this is your brain, this is drugs. Like, okay, like what drugs? How much drugs? Who's taking it? What's their mental attitude? Where's the context here, guys? Nope. This is drugs. This is your brain. Terrified me. I was like 9. I'm like, oh my God, why would anyone do this? Dare. And then today, How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, a lot of people attribute that book to the kind of reform and experiment research expansion that we're seeing today, because he just kind of brought this a bit more nuanced left brain scientific, study guy background to it. And that was a good thing. I think overall, that was a good thing. But again, it's one perspective. And then psychedelic, journalism, the shift from taboo to therapy. There's been a lot of wonderful reporting on what these substances can do. But each of these works changed the emotional frame around these drugs. Some created fear, some created curiosity, some created distrust of institutions, and some opened the door to policy and cultural change. And so these stories don't just reflect the conversation; they are moving it, forward or backward, but certainly moving it. And that brings us to the story we're living in now, which is the psychedelic renaissance. So the story is changing really, really fast. As we talked about, Trump signed this executive order specifically for substances like Ibogaine to treat PTSD. And what's exciting is that psychedelics have now become a dual aisle conversation. It was usually just the lefties, the Democrats who wanted to talk about psychedelics, the hippies. But because of how promising they are to treat things like depression and PTSD in veterans, it's jumped the aisle, and now there are a lot of right-wing people who are having this conversation, and that could be a good thing. It's an exciting and meaningful shift, but the news story can become too clean and too polished if we move too quickly. So we see what's changing. Psychedelic medicine is gaining attention, therapy and retreat culture and wellness markets, and a lot of investors and tech figures, as we know, are joining this space. But there are a lot of people that are getting left out. These voices are getting louder, but the loudest voices are still a chosen few. So indigenous voices, reciprocity and cultural context. There's a lot of pseudo shamans, people who go and spend 1 week at a retreat, and they're like, now I'm a shaman. Now I can, facilitate. And people really taking advantage of people. There's control and, coercion that's being swept under the rug in the name of making sure that everything stays above board so we can push these drugs forward. The other part of this conversation that I think is worth mentioning is that ketamine is not a psychedelic, it is a psychotropic. And the one study that's been done on ketamine being addictive proved that it is highly addictive. Highly addictive. Well, the one study that's been done on that. But that's not really part of the conversation right now, because we're trying to move the narrative of these are positive substances. And so if one of them that is being lumped into the psychedelic category happens to be addictive, that could set everything back. But I think it's a real problem, and it's something that we should be talking about. Once again, we're talking about complexity and nuance. And the other thing that's, getting left out is who has access, who gets healed, who gets priced out, who gets, criminalized, and who gets rich. And that should be at the forefront, and something that I comment on a bit in my book. So I don't think the answer is not to return to fear, but is to tell a better and more honest story, a story that can promise, that can hold promise and harm at the same time. And that's why I chose fiction. So I really, really love thrillers. First of all, I just grew up reading thrillers, and I'm just a huge fan of like all of the usual, suspects that were, popular in the 90s, James Patterson, etc. But what I like about fiction is that it allows people to enter complexity emotionally. Like when you are watching a documentary or you're reading a nonfiction book, first of all, you're probably already interested in the topic. You already know something of it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have stopped to pick it up. But it also kind of creates this, you have your barriers up. It's almost like someone's talking to you, and you can kind of get, defensive about some of the ideas. Whereas if you're just following along with a character's journey, you can kind of do some deeper dives into some real things that are going on, but in a more light, entertaining way. And you can carry, people along in the story. So it lets you explore ambiguity, fear, desire, trauma, and perception without reducing the subject to an argument. And I think that's a really fun, and like for some reason, like slightly unused territory to be talking about psychedelics. Like we should have more fiction, like more movies and TV shows and books written about this stuff, because you just, the experience of, tripping can be really personal, and it can be really insane. And allowing your characters to go through this can be a really fun challenge. And so yeah, I had a hell of a lot of fun writing this. I'm gonna share a little thing. I'm gonna share a little excerpt from this. By the way, Chaucer's Books, who's a local bookshop, will be here later, and they'll be selling copies, so everyone can get your own. Please read my book. Okay. So, this book is about identical twins who haven't spoken in years. They fucking hate each other, but they are forced back together when their identical DNA is found at a murder scene. Pretty soon, they end up at the epicenter of a government conspiracy and the psychedelic underground, and they run into a hacker named a hacker named Sherlock, who knows a bit too much about the government psyops and conspiracies that we've been talking about tonight, and he fills the twins in. MK Ultra also went by Project Artichoke and Project Bluebird. We know it was a decade-long scheme that began in the 50s, where CIA operatives were experimenting with methods of mind control, most notably using psychedelics like LSD. Over 100 individual experiments across dozens of American labs, hospitals, prisons, and colleges, most of which had no idea what they were doing was part of a CIA op. There's dark tales of government stooges dosing unsuspecting agents, mental patients, you name it. Sherlock scrolls through archives of men in uniforms, hovering over screaming patients strapped to gurneys. There are even stories of collective hallucinations, this is true, drug-induced mass psychosis. Long story short, it was a massive failure. It did nothing more than turn people on, drive them insane, or kill them. One of the greatest jack-offs in history. All stemming from immense paranoia that the enemy may get there first. Yes, I've read about it. It was a major oversight, I mumble into my knees. Part of the reason they made drugs like LSD illegal in the 60s. Well, yes, once they realized they'd let the universe out of the bag, they quashed things. The official war on drugs is a great example of that. Mostly grown-ass men on a power trip, attempting to control things they can't control. And now that there's a resurgence of interest in these drugs, Big Biz wants in on the deal. Sherlock swings around to face me, tenting his fingers in front of him. Corporations controlled by men, men controlled by fear, fear controlled by consciousness, consciousness controlled by corporations. So we know like what side of this conversation this guy's on, right? And there's a few more people that are on his side of things, and there are people on other sides. I tried to include the perspectives of the people that are really in the middle of this conversation right now, the ones who are trying to liberate this and make this accessible for everyone. I mean, like dosing the water supply kind of, liberation. And then the people who are like, can I please patent certain settings so everyone has to pay me if they ever want to do this, right? There's lots of this conversation right now is just really rife for a thriller, because there's just lots of competing ideas about what should be owned, what should be controlled, what should be, accessed. And so I'm going to leave it there for now. So not all stories liberate us. Some backfire. I know all y'all can read, so I'm not going to read this entire thing, but the point is, we have seen that there are mistakes like emotional manipulation, erasing historical context, centering only the loudest voices, which is still, happening, and selling certainty. And there are just a lot of ways that we can see how it failed, be aware of that, and then decide to make different changes, different choices. So you can discuss nuance and complexity. You can show the, lineage that we talked about tonight. We can talk about the indigenous voices and the people who have been doing this for generations and thousands of years who may have a different, attitude and respect and reverence for some of these medicines. You can ask better questions and make room for some of the mystery, ambiguity, and evolving evidence. Because better storytelling does not mean more positive storytelling. You don't want to get caught in the idea that everything has to be sunshine and rainbows when we're talking about this stuff. It means more truthful storytelling. And the most powerful storytelling may not be the public one, it may be the private one. And this is what I really wanted to get at tonight, because this is what psychedelics have taught me. Is that if we want to make a different choice with how we show up and how we discern media and propaganda, we have to really start with the stories that we're telling ourselves, the stories that every single day we're holding on to that we think are defining us. If it's the roles that we play, if it's like wife or mother or filmmaker or Texan or Republican or whatever it is, whatever values and beliefs that we're just like kung fu gripping. What if we relax that a little bit? What would happen? Would we still exist? Would we still breathing in and out? Would we still be us? Because that's what the experiences with LSD, psilocybin, and ayahuasca especially have taught me, is that if all of that goes away and I'm still here, then maybe that story is just a story. Maybe I can embody it, put it on every morning like a suit, but be aware that it doesn't actually have to define me. And especially if it's no longer serving me and it's limiting me and how I see the world, maybe I can lose it. Maybe I can change it. And if we start showing up that way and being more curious about our own stories, we can start being more curious and discerning about the ones that we're being taught and told. Because it's very hard to be triggered if you are no longer so tethered to those stories that it's constantly triggering your anxiety every single time it's happening. Because everything, like what I realized through my experiences, is that it's all a story. Everything that I think I am is a story. And so if we can just loosen our grip a bit on that, I think that we can all come together, have more complex, nuanced, conversations around this stuff, be more skeptical about the things that we're hearing, and not repeat some of the same mistakes that we have made in the past. So the story inside us determines which stories outside us can control us. So where does that leave us? I think we have a responsibility to tell the story better than the last one. Better does not mean simpler. It means more honest, and it means making room for science and spirit, healing and harm, wonder and warning. So the question I leave with you all with is, what story are you carrying? Who gave it to you? Is it even yours? Does it still serve you? And what story do you want to tell now? Because stories shape perception. Perception shapes culture. Culture shapes what becomes possible. So if we're going to tell stories, let's make sure they are great ones. Thank you. That's so cool. That was such a great round of applause. You guys were amazing. Thank you so much. So cool.
Yeah, that was an awesome presentation, Lindsay. Thank you for bringing that forward.
So much.
Yeah. Something that really stood out to me was a definition you offered around propaganda, and that the propaganda is teaching us how we should feel about something, not actually teaching us what it is. And I wonder, how you hold that as a filmmaker and a storyteller, because I feel like there is a tonality in that sort of artistry that's really influential on how we feel. So as a creative and an artist in that way, how do you ensure that you're bringing people into a feeling body in a way that still leads them to their own discovery?
Oh, that's such a great question. Wow. when I started as a film major, I wanted to make fiction films. I wanted to tell, like blockbuster stories. I wanted to be Spielberg, guys. Let's be real. That's what everyone wanted to do back in my day. And for a lot of reasons, I ended up editing documentaries. That's how I started in this business. And I realized really quickly, as I was editing, which if you are making documentaries, the directing happens in the edit because you don't really know what you have. And all these interviews and all of this stuff that you've shot, you don't really know what the story is until you sat down and started watching it and putting it together. So that's how I learned how to be a storyteller is in the edit. And I realized really quickly while I was living in Hawaii and working on some documentaries there, that it was a very powerful thing that I held in my hand because my superpower is that I can, with the right edit, with the right context, with the right music, I can create an emotional reaction in people. And I did. I would make, documentaries for like charity events, and the 4-minute sizzle I made would get a standing ovation, and they'd be like, "Here's all my money." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Emotion is what matters. The emotional connection is what changes people's minds. The emotion is what is so powerful. And so I realized then that I wanted to continue to tell true stories because I wanted to put that power to good use in telling stories that I felt were important and could actually make people feel good. No, there's a lot of media out there that does it. That's designed to make you feel like shit, and that works too. It all works. But there was something about before my experiences with psychedelics, before my own spiritual awakening, I still wanted to tell stories that at the end made people feel something positive, made them feel optimistic, made them feel engaged or inspired or motivated in some way. And you can do that through laughter, you can do that through tears, but you have to tie it up in the end where it's a hopeful message. And that just kind of became something that was really important to me. And I also realized very, very quickly that I could insert my point of view and steer people to what I wanted them to feel, or I could show it as objectively as I could and allow people to get to their own conclusion while also just sharing it as a really powerful story. So that became a question that I would ask myself because I saw a lot of documentaries that were like, "This is what I want you to think," right? And sometimes they do a really wonderful job in doing that. Am I here to say that that's, right or wrong? Some people just have a specific agenda and something that they want to share. Why are there so many more horror movies right now than murder, true crime shows than comedies? I don't understand. That's just not my thing. But I realized how powerful emotion is. And so as a storyteller, and then I had all these experiences where I started, waking up, and I had a very hero's dose of LSD one night that was like, "Hey, you're here to help evolve and to help aid in the evolution of human consciousness through storytelling. This is what you're going to spend the rest of your life doing. Just strap in, and this is what you do." And so I started to add what kind of stories I'm telling to my meditation practice. How can I be more present in the story? How can I be authentic and express the story as I can? It has to have my fingerprint on it, but allowing people to get there themselves. If it's a documentary, if it's even the commercial work that I've done, and certainly in the books that I'm writing, because now it's just I can just make shit up. It doesn't have to be real. I'm leading with how I want people to feel and to explore and exploring two sides to an issue so that people can maybe navigate something that they haven't thought of before and make up their own mind about it. It's a long-winded answer, but yeah.
Yeah, I love it. That's a bunch of great content that you offered there for us to pick apart. And I come from a coaching background, and with a heavy spiritual influence. And so I work with a lot of people who are like, "I really just want to transcend the story I'm telling about myself, da 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 da." And the reality is, and you can tell me how this lands for you, in my perspective of the human experience, we are here to explore the uniqueness of our incarnation through story. That's part of the uniqueness of the human experience. And so, yes, there is a truth of letting go of the stories that are untrue, that are limiting us from our full honesty and authenticity. And with that, we get to play with persona. We do get to yield our story to support our service to humanity. And so, to anyone who may find themselves imbalanced in this idea of needing to let go of the stories they tell themselves, I encourage you to explore this question that you're offering of what are the stories that you want to hold to, express yourself, and then how you show up in the world.
Hell yeah. Absolutely. My sister, and I do have a twin, as I mentioned, and we are very like yin and yang. Like we have a lot of things that are the same because we were once one zygote, but in terms of our beliefs and like attitudes about life, we could not be more different about certain things. And so when I started on this little walkabout, the spiritual walkabout that I'm on, she asked me like, yeah, but the more that you let go, are you even going to be Lindsay anymore? I told her, I said, the more that I let go of the stuff that I've been holding that was not even mine, that may have been my parents, love you, Mom, but it had been yours, or my teachers or anyone else's, the more that I let go of the things that were holding me back, the more I feel like me, like the real me, the more effortless it is, the more joy and peace I feel on a daily basis, the more creative and silly and weird I feel. Like I'm more me than I've ever been. And I think that that's it's backwards to the way that we think about things and that we're taught to think about things. Like, oh my God, if, ego death can be a real shit show if you've never experienced anything like that. Like, well, who am I? If all that goes away, oh my God, I'm going to die. But then once you have that and you're holding everything a little bit lighter, it's like, wow, oh my gosh, I get to fully embody what I'm here to do and who I'm here to be, while also knowing that some of these things may go away before I go. And that's okay. I will navigate that too. I still get to show up and be this. And I want people to feel that. I want people to find that. That's a huge reason why I do what I do when I share the stories that I do, is because I think all of us have layers that we don't need, and the more that we can embody who we are. So a big reason why I love Burning Man and some of these festivals is like these little microcosms of like, be the weirdest freak that you are, just come out and just do what you want, want to do. Like, we will uphold you as that. We are not here to judge as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. Please, by God, do it. And I had never experienced that before the bus. Actually, that was my first time going to like festivals and being involved in that. And some of the freaks that got on the bus too. Like, I was like, oh, you can be this, you can show up as this, and you can find your, family and find your tribe, and then go back out into the world with that level of groundedness in who you are and share that from that, place. Like, it completely opened my eyes in so many ways. It's amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah. I love that. And I'm glad to feel that resonance with you and just festival and freedom culture. And it reminds me of a clip from the documentary when Kesey said, when you're operating from love, you're just protected in that way. And I imagine your psychedelic and spiritual awakening experiences have sort of shaped you into that attunement. And I'm wondering if there's a time where you've been needing clarity on a project and you've turned toward psychedelic exploration to receive clarity. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I have. I'll actually share a story that just happened to me. So this is book 1, My Twin the Murderer is book 1. Book 2 is My Twin the Witch. Book 3 is My Twin the Alien. And book 4 is My Twin the Ghost. And it's just gonna get weirder and weirder, guys. Like, it's gonna get weirder and weirder. But I'm halfway through the first draft of book 2, and I got stuck, which is fine. It happens. But I got really, really stuck in that, and I couldn't find the emotional core that I had felt so strongly about book 1. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to get there with the like normal way of just writing through it and using my, left brain. I need to do a dive. So I sat with Blue Vuitton mushrooms, which are fabulous. About 45 minutes into that trip, though, I got a lot of, great colors and nothing was happening. I'm like, come on, guys, let's go. I had set a very clear intention. I wanted to know what was going on. And then all of a sudden, I just got this huge wave of grief, like this huge, just rolling grief that came over me. And I mean, keened, I think is the best way to like the right word for it. Just wailed for about an hour and a half because I had lost my stepmom last year. And what I realized is that I hadn't fully grieved that, like because it hadn't fully processed, because we kept losing people so consistently last year that I hadn't actually processed what that meant. But also the last conversation that I had with her was like the most difficult conversation I had ever had with her. And I didn't realize that story, that what happened from that exchange, I had accidentally, subconsciously written into my story. And so now this book, the second book, the relationship between the mother and the twins, I'm mirroring that exchange, that moment. That is the like crescendo emotional moment, is that conversation, but told in the context of these characters and what they've gone through. And I realized, like through tears, like, oh, I actually have a lot to say about this. I have a lot to share about this. And it was just this really incredible, awakening experience. That's just like, 4 hours of my day, profound life-changing thing. And I do believe that, that mushrooms are such a wonderful, they're like ambassadors of our planet. They are a technology that are designed to work with us so that we are capable of clarity and capable of connection and capable of creating in new ways and helping to tell a new story. And so that was a really, really wonderful, really, really wonderful trip. I'm looking forward to the next one. I think that they're a wonderful tool for the creative process.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think a lot of us can relate to the way psilocybin and mushrooms can support us in accessing both internal alchemy and our creative process. And earlier you had a slide that was sort of sharing like where stories go wrong or what we miss. And something that stood out was like, honor of the lineage, reciprocity, etc. And I would like to have insight on your personal process, understanding that you do utilize psychedelics for, I'm sure, a variety of different intentions. What is in your personal practice to ensure integrity and reverence?
Absolutely. So first of all, I've had the honor of sitting with 3 different Amazonian traditions with ayahuasca in Ecuador, in Brazil last year, and in Peru. And I also have sat with ayahuasca in Los Angeles. Okay. Which is also a wonderful group. I'm not here to say that those groups shouldn't exist, but the experience of sitting with people whose teachings have been passed on, who go out in the wilderness and do weeks of a diet with these plants, will sit out there until the plants start to speak and sing to them and give them their own song, so that becomes, because they believe that the plant doesn't heal, that the songs do, that they are channeled, they're given the songs, and then the song is what actually heals. And it's a different framework, because I think a lot of people in the Western idea of sitting with some of these medicines, the idea is like, okay, how quickly can I get through this? How quickly can I just heal and be like done with this? Is there a one quick fix? How quickly in like one weekend can I just be done? Can I just be fucking done with this drama? And what sitting with those traditions have taught me is that there's actually a completely different way of existing on this planet, where the whole story of like how we just spend our day and how we develop relationships with others and how we talk about things and like what we use as a clock, because they don't have watches. They just are like, oh, okay, it's going to rain. Now we're not going to do this thing anymore. Like the earth is their clock. It threw into sharp relief a lot of the stories that I see around psychedelics, and how important it is to have more like a cast a wider net in terms of these points of view. And what's really awesome is there are traditions that are traveling around the world and speaking on panels like this, and going to some of these conferences and appearing on podcasts, and all this is really great. But I also think that the underlying story of the West and what we deem important. I think part of that also has to change on a deep consciousness level, and we can learn that through these types of immersive experiences. And you don't have to go to Peru and, puke your brains out. You don't have to do that to have this type of experience. But I think there's lots of ways to access this. And of course, I completely understand where I'm coming from. I am a white Western woman. So when I'm writing the second book actually takes place in the Brazilian Amazon. It takes place with a fictionalized version of an indigenous community there that sits with a plant that's similar to ayahuasca. And I understand that I'm not an indigenous person. So this is coming through my lens. And I'm very aware that my lens is going to be one specific angle of this story. But I also want to, I'm working with the Hunikuan in Brazil. There is a nonprofit that's focusing on supporting women's voices, because the men are the tradition, the wisdom keepers and the shamans. But that wasn't always the case. It's only been the case for the past 200 years since the rubber tappers went in and impacted these communities. So supporting women for their own wisdom and their different, point of view and their perspective of their relationship to the earth, I think is really fascinating and important, and not being heard as loudly in that sphere. So that book is going to help support that specific nonprofit, and I'm also relying on their translator and the woman who started that nonprofit for intel. I want to make this allegiant to how you sit with these medicines and what you believe, while also not using any of your wording and not using anything that is part of your sacred tradition. The only other person that I know that has done this is Ann Patchett, and she wrote an amazing book called State of Wonder that I highly recommend, about an indigenous tribe in Brazil. But I'm walking that tightrope of understanding where I come from, the privilege that I have, while also wanting to how do I help expand some of these stories and some of these huge, impactful, incredible moments that I've had in my life that have changed my perspective on this world, but in a more accessible format. What can I do? And so, yes, it's definitely a give and take, and it sure as shit is not perfect, but yeah.
Wow. I'm so glad I asked that question. That was a really unexpected answer, and it really shows just your integrity and thoughtfulness and what you're creating.
Thank you.
Very cool. I have a final question before we tune into the audience Q&A, and I'm not sure exactly how it's going to come out. I think it requires a little bit of context. So I find people have psychedelic experiences and they want to share their story. Yeah. And often there's actually something under that they're really reaching for that isn't part of their storytelling explicitly. Does that make sense? They're wanting to be seen, they're wanting to be heard, they're wanting to be empathized with, but it's through sometimes a very theatricized retelling of their psychedelic experience. For some reason, I'm wanting you to comment on that, or maybe offer some inspiration for how folks can share their psychedelic experience and insight in a way that feels grounding and relational.
Yeah. Well, that's such an interesting question. The embellishment of the trip. I mean, first of all, I think so. I'm gonna take the other side of the argument for a minute, because I think that we're taking these a little too seriously. As someone who's done my fair share of tripping, I wrote an article for High Times recently called, it's basically on comedy as an integration tool, and how important it is to kind of highlight the weird and the surreal and the wild, and how that can also be sacred and, grounding, and how even the most ridiculous thing that you're seeing, you can figure out what that made you feel afterward, what that brought for you and how that made you feel. And from there, you can start doing the work of, integration, while also giving a wink and a nod to the universe for giving it to you in such a weird way. I remember my mom read that article and she called me and she's like, "It sounds like you've done a lot of drugs." And I'm like, yeah, Mom, I have. She's like, I think you've done more drugs than me now. And I'm like, oh, well, the parents always want more for their kids and they have. So I'm so happy that I graduated. Yes, thank you. And I think that there's a time to take things very seriously and to hold that container. And I have been very lucky to have been in those situations in some of the retreats that I've attended. Some of this is not a, laughing matter. And I really appreciate how serious the, medical movement is taking this conversation. I think it's all really important. But I think we can also have a little Keynesian Mary Prankster side of the conversation and say they're also ridiculous, like ridiculous. Sometimes the things that you experience are so insane. And sometimes you're trying to explain this to someone and it's so hard. They don't get it. They're not going to get it. And they also may not have the emotional depth to be able to hold space for you, even if you're trying to make light of something, but it ended up being a heavy, like a lot of gravity, because some of these things are very silly looking, but they're pointing to something very serious and challenging. And so I think that one of the biggest things is basically to know your audience, know who you're talking to, because sometimes people are like ready to just 2 feet grounded, stand there and be there to like support you. And sometimes people are like, whoa, dude, you gotta stop doing drugs. Oh my God, what is wrong with you? And that can be very disorienting when you're just trying to have someone that is in on the joke with you to try to just help you untangle what the fuck that was. So that's really important. And I think that having more access to integration circles that allow for more of this, where we can hop from someone talking about some very heavy trauma to someone saying, and then my grandmother was climbing up my leg with a knife in her teeth. And I was going, what am I looking at? We can have space for the entire range of the experience. I also love that people like Dennis Walker have started a retreat in Jamaica that is now basically just for people who want to dose and have fun and be silly. Like there is like a night where there's a heavier dose and it's a bit more of a ceremony, but then the rest of the time it's just like it's a community, it's a party, it's fun, it's like it's so silly, And I think that's the start of hopefully a trend, is that we can have the very serious retreats that are for very serious work, and then we can have the ridiculous retreats for the freaks like me who also just want to go and meet like-minded weirdos and take mushrooms and have an awesome time.
Awesome. Again, I'm so glad I'm asked. Thank you. Yeah. Sweet. Well, I sense the audience brewing with their own curiosities, so we'll give space for the audience Q&A. Paxton has a mic for you, and you can raise your hand if you have a question or a reflection for Lindsay.
I love your sense of humor.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you'd be willing to share how you do a rewrite if you feel like it might be too manipulative to what you're getting people to think, and what that process is for you, how that unfolds.
That's a great question. Because if I am leaning more to one side than the other, I'm certainly more of an evangelist than like the sky is falling kind of psychedelic person, in case you didn't notice. Hello. But my sister does not like LSD. My sister is like, psychedelics are fine. She's a very, very good writer. And so I give it to my sister. I write it. I give it to her. And she's like, no, no, this does not land for me. Like I rolled my eyes when I read this, because she is my touchstone for like the wider thriller audience, the people who probably have never taken psychedelics, don't know anything that we talked about tonight, who I'm really writing this stuff for. I love that the heads are going to get all these Easter eggs, because there's plenty of Easter eggs for the heads, okay? but I also want to make this accessible to people who are seeing things in the news that are happening and are like, wait, what is iboga? I'm like, why is ecstasy? Why? Right? I mean, I think this is a big moment to be sharing more stories in this space. So I want to make them accessible. I want them to bring people in to the characters emotionally without jumping the shark into, but they're so much fun. You should try them, and so she has definitely pulled me back. She also wrote a lot of the narration for Going Further and pulled me off the deep end of that too. She had me cut like whole scenes. She's like, enough already with this, festival culture. Bleh. Like tell the story and then get out. So yeah. Yeah, there is like a 2-hour version for sure.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for everything you've shared. It's been a delight. I want to follow up on Hannah Jo's last question from an internal perspective. So when I'm doing psychedelics, or really anything that is kind of shifting my consciousness in one way or another, there's a part of me that is sitting in my head and sort of taking notes and narrating and basically preparing to tell the story. And it's distracting as all get out, and doesn't sort of hold me back from really dropping into the experience. And there's also a part of me that's like, if I stop having these thoughts, and will I even be conscious anymore? And my curiosity is whether you've encountered that kind of experience, and how you work with that.
That's such a great question. My mind is constantly telling the story of my life, like all day, every day. My character in my book has OCD because I have OCD, and it's like my mind's like, get that all the time, constantly. So yes, 100%. I'm starting to like think about how I'm going to talk about something as it's happening in real time on ayahuasca, and I'm like, this is helpful. What am I doing? And you're absolutely right. It completely takes you out of the moment. It completely takes you out of what it's trying to show you and the experience and the reflection. The only thing that has worked for me, I'm going to say this, but there is certain breath work techniques that from years of like meditating do help me get out of my mind. If I really, really focus, I can get there. And also just bombing my brains out. Like as soon as ayahuasca's like, okay, and now here we go. And there's a physical experience of purging. All of that's just like poof, it's gone. And with psilocybin and LSD, I mean, candidly, I haven't sat deep enough in those experiences to even want to stop the narration that it's happening in real time. So as I'm getting the like downloads, I'm like, in my head, and so at those moments, I just allow it and then try to get back onto the train when I'm done, when my brain's done. But yeah, that's totally, I never really thought about that. But clearly, yeah, definitely as a storyteller, that's a consistent issue. Yeah. What's your name, by the way?
Bruce.
Bruce. You have an awesome smile, Bruce. Thank you for that question.
In your example with the Merry Pranksters, in my perception, that was kind of a revolution in consciousness when that began. And it seems that the power in history is, for those that don't understand it, they're bound to repeat it. So if you could explain to us what you think are the top 3 things that we could learn from the history that you described, so as we move forward in this conscious revolution now, we're not bound to repeat and we can do a better job.
Yeah, absolutely. And we touched on a few of them tonight, but for me personally, like the top 3, I think the biggest one is expanding who gets the microphone. I mean, a big reason why and again, white Western woman here, I know that I'm not representing all people, but there's also not a lot of female voices in this space, especially females, women that are writing about psychedelics, about what the experience is like that don't have to do with healing. Like I think that there's and again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have both. Like it's so amazing that so many books are being written now about how women are healing from years and sometimes generations of trauma through psychedelic work, and it's incredibly potent and powerful and amazing. But women can also take psychedelics and like go to Mars and hang out with aliens. Like we can do lots of things, you know, like the story of men navigating the psychedelic experience dictated and like notated by their wives has been happening for a very long time. But the conversation of like what it is like for me, like what it's like for me to trip, some of my direct experiences I put in my book, because I'm like, I want to talk about how weird and fun and weird and silly some of this is, and what it's like for me, because the way that I experience this with my hormones and my background and like what it's like to be a babe, like it's going to be different, you know? And so like more voices, more expansion of voices across the, you know, spectrum, because we're all going to have a different experience, and that takes time. So I think the biggest thing is like taking our foot off the gas a little bit to start having a bit more nuanced conversations, and to allow for different opinions, and to hear more people like disagree. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just have a podcast where people just got on and like disagreed about things, and they talked to each other with respect, and no one was trying to like make the other person believe what they had to say, but that they're just like, I honor your, you know, choice to believe what you believe. Let's talk about it. I want more of that. So more complexity, more nuance, more voices, and then just, you know, being willing to see that there is no certainty, there is no quick fix, there is no guarantee, there is no way to do that, because the way that these interact with the human mind is as diverse as the humans that take them. So how can we possibly say that they're going to save the day or they're going to destroy us? Both lines are bullshit. And I worry that if we push too quickly in the other direction, that we're going to get set back to where we were. And so it's just like, let's try to have more conversations. Let's invite more of our community to be up here, to be talking about their experience and sharing it in whatever stories that they feel, you know, serve them. Yeah. Good question. I see you, Phil. Good question. Goingfurther.com. So further is spelled wrong. And I want to tell you why, because the guy who named her Further is still alive, and his name is Roy Seaburn. So it's Going Further, FURTHUR.com, and you can rent it. It's on Vimeo. You can watch it tonight. He was really high on acid, and he was like, what should we name the bus? Like whatever, like where we're going is whatever we can think of, but further than that. Like the bus is going to New York, but we want it to go further than that. And then he's like, but I couldn't remember how to spell it. I was so high. I was like, FURTU, I don't know, R, okay. And it's stuck. There's a band called Further that's spelled that way. I mean, it'd be just like, that just became the thing. And so, yeah, so the movie is Going Further, but spelled with a U. Yeah, check it out. It's awesome. And you'll see me in it. I'm a neo prankster. My prankster name is Scribbles, which had nothing to do with me being a writer. I was just like, the first day on the bus, they gave us name tags, and the bus is going like this, and I'm trying to write my name, and I was like, shit, and I was trying to scribble it out. I wrote on top, they're like, oh, Scribbles. Like, it wasn't a fun reason, but now it makes sense. So it's how it's all happened for a reason. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, audience. We're going to tune in to our final set of rapid fire questions, the Change Your Lens series, written by the one and only Jacob Tell. This is a series of questions I ask every guest.
Oh, wow.
Invitation is just to share the first thing that comes to mind. My first question for you is, who is your greatest influence and why?
Hunter S. Thompson. Hunter S. Thompson. Because I read his books right after I got into, you know, Kerouac and Kesey and everyone. And the way that he lived his life and the way that he wrote, I had never experienced anything like it before. And it was like the beginning of me getting in touch with my inner freak.
Mm-hmm. And if you were stranded on an island with only one book to read, what are you reading?
Fountainhead. I'm sorry. I love it. It's my all-time favorite book, and I could read it 1,000 times and I wouldn't get sick of it.
And if you could listen to one album?
That would be Abbey Road by the Beatles. Yeah, holla, what's up? Scott, tracks like 8 through 14, that last part that they recorded all in one section is like the best piece of music that has ever existed. And my husband was here, he'd be like, and I'm like, why did I marry you? How do you not love the Beatles? Like, what is going on? Yeah.
And if you could have a psychedelic experience with anyone dead or alive, who would be there and what psychedelics?
Really? Hunter would be there for sure. And probably the Shulgins. I think it would be so fun. Like, I want to, like if I had to choose between Anne and Sasha, Anne, for sure. Because she was such an amazing trip sitter. All of her work with like, Jungian, philosophy. She just helped people like meet their shadow. But she just had this like calming, just like relaxed, creative energy to her. And so probably one of their compounds, maybe 2C. And like Hunter, I don't know, like LSD and cocaine. That'd be an interesting combination, but it's Hunter, so that's probably what it was. And then we go out in his field behind his house and shoot guns at the sky. Sounds like a plan.
Naturally. Is there a psychedelic that you're fascinated by but haven't yet tried?
2CB I have not tried, and I have heard. I've read P-Call and T-Call. I have friends who have sat with that medicine. I've read books about those experiences, and so that's probably at the top of my list. But also intravenous DMT. I know I do. I would love to try that at some point.
Yeah, I would do it once.
It might be one of those things that I'm like, I do for research for a book, because by the time I get to book 3, it's probably going to be about DMT. I'm like, well,
is that the alien one?
It is. Yeah. Obviously, we're talking about aliens. Got to talk about DMT.
That feels proper.
Yeah. I mean, if we're going to do it, come on.
And tell us a trippy story.
Oh, okay. Strap in. Here we go. Okay. I'm just going to tell you about the time that Ken Kesey baptized me in LSD. Stand up. I know, right? Crazy, but it happened. So, at the end of the Further tour, the pranksters were a bit restless. Like Zane had enough. He kicked everyone off the bus on the East Coast, and made us all try to figure out how to get back to California on our own. And it was everyone. By the time we all got back to San Francisco, we were all like, "Oh man, like, what are we gonna do? Like, Zane's a lot of work. Like, is this movie even gonna happen?" And everyone's like, "Ah, man, that was so rough." And we had been taking LSD probably every 3 days, not on the bus. Very important. Do not take drugs on a moving vehicle. Duh. So that didn't happen. But the film crew were taking LSD about every 3 days. When we got to San Francisco, someone said, "Hey, a friend of mine does the tie-dye for the Grateful Dead, and he's got this Owsley acid." And I was like, "Bring it on." So I had 3 dots, 1, 2, 3, thinking that each dot was 100 micrograms. Each dot was 500 micrograms, folks. So I'm like in the middle of an interview in the Haight. All of a sudden, like the whole world starts to tilt. I was like, ruh-roh. So I immediately go and call my mom, because last time she like totally talked me down. She's like, "Oh, watch a Disney movie. Just chill out, man." I was like, I'm going to call mom. And my mom didn't answer. I was like, "Oh no, what am I going to do?" But she had booked a hotel for me on Hotwire. This is important. On Hotwire that day, because I was just running around shooting, and I hadn't had time to book myself anything. So I'm about to walk down to my like rental car, just sit in my car and be like, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." And I pass a friend of mine named Mandrake, and he's like, "Hey, are you okay?" And I'm like, I just grab him. I'm like, "Something's happened. I need you to just, be with me here. And I took too much acid." He goes, "Okay, I got you. Don't worry. What are we gonna do?" Well, I'm like, I have to just go get my stuff and go to my hotel." He's like, "Great. I will get you there. Don't worry." And then I was going, "This is the worst thing that I've ever done." And he goes, "Or is it the best thing you've ever done?" It's too early to tell. Don't psych yourself out, man. Love Mike Rad. Such a good guy. I use that line in my book, by the way. So we get in an Uber. We go to the hotel. It was called the Carriage Inn. It was a dump. Did not care. I'm just like, just give me a room. We walk in. the guy, I had to wait like all of like 3 minutes because someone was in front of us. And the guy goes, "I'm so sorry you had to wait. I'm going to upgrade you to a suite." I was like, whatever. What universe am I in? Just like, give me a key. Let me go. We go up to the 3rd floor. We exit the elevator. And like, I noticed that there are little plaques on each door. And there's names on the doors. Hunter S. Thompson. What? Robin Williams. I was like, the rooms are themed. I wonder who we got. We get to the end of the hall, turn left. It's the Ken Kesey suite. Guys, the kid downstairs had no idea what we were in town for. It was all like the one Kesey suite on the entire planet. And my mom just happened to book it on Hotwire, which is where you just guess. You don't know where you're going to end up, right? Oh my God. We walk in, there's like framed photos of the bus on the wall. Kesey's bio is typed on a typewriter on the desk. And I sat on that bed, surrounded by all this paisley moving wallpaper. And I got the download of like, not only are you going to make sure that you make this movie, but this is going to be your life for the rest of your life. Like, this is what you're doing. It was like he had knighted me. Like, this is it, babe. You're in this to win this. You're making this fucking movie, and I'm going to make sure of it. And I remember going to where all the like pranksters were hanging out at yet another Dead cover show in Town. And I danced harder and more free than I've ever danced before. One of the pranksters who ended up putting in some money to get the film made, he told me after it came out, the reason I put that money in is because I saw the way you danced that night. And I was like, whatever she's going to make, I want to help make that. Because everyone had been so down for so long. And we're like, is this movie even going to happen? And I was just like, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. The next day we went back to that suite and we shot 2 of the final interviews with Zane and Derek. And like at that desk with the Kesey typewriter in the shots. When you watch the movie, you'll get to see the Kesey suite. That Roach Motel closed down a few years later, but that is my story of how Kesey baptized me in LSD.
So we'll skip to the last few questions. And on that note, do you think that we live in a simulation?
Yes, in the way that what we think is constantly creating our reality. I do believe that we exist in a very narrow frequency of a lot of different types of realities. And what we can perceive with our five senses is like pretty pathetic versus what actually exists, based on what I have seen and heard, sometimes not even on drugs. That's a different story. Read book 3. We'll talk all about this. But I do feel that frequency is such an important thing, and I know that we talk about it in this scene, but it's something that a lot of people don't think about and don't know about. But my reality completely shifted when I started to wake up and when I started to get curious about my own mind, and I started to develop new neural pathways to the thoughts that have been bringing me down and brought them into a positive, more hopeful attitude. My external reality completely shifted. The people that came into my life, the opportunities that did, I mean, it all changed. And so I started to see things as a game. And I think that, and that doesn't mean that I don't take things seriously, and it doesn't mean that I don't suffer and I don't grieve and all of those things. But again, I'm not holding on to it so tightly because I do understand that on some level it is a game. And so that allows me to show up as the best version of me most of the time, and to have the freedom to create and to enjoy it while I get to be here, without taking things so seriously.
Yeah, I feel you. My final question for you, in 60 seconds or less, can you please describe the nature of consciousness?
What? Come on, man.
It's Jacob. It's not me.
Homie, like, why? The nature of consciousness. Jeez. The nature of consciousness, I think we are all part of the same soup. Everything that we are perceiving around us, the way that we look and feel like we are separate from things, it's only because our minds are turning it into that. It's like the receiver that we are experiencing reality through is telling us this lie. In order for us to figure out how to navigate this world and to learn some important lessons. But from what I've experienced, it's all this really powerful soup of love. It's all part of the same energetic being, divine intelligence, that we are participating briefly within these bodies where we are being told this lie, and we are living out this lie in order for us to navigate, and educate ourselves with different, kind of like a game where it's like, this is what I'm here to learn, and this is how I'm going to grow, and these are the challenges I'm going to put in front of me in order to pass these tests, and we're doing it to ourselves, and it's all from love. I mean, that's the closest. That's all I got.
Yeah.
The nature of consciousness. Damn, dude. What's the nature of consciousness, man?
Oh, well, thank you so much, Lindsay, for humoring us with all this deep truth.